We can speak to John McDonald from the Adam Smith Institute, a free market think tank with which Liz Truss has close links, and Zack Polanski is the newly elected deputy leader of the Green Party. John, let me come to you first of all. Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
Kwasi Kwarteng made it very clear, just mentioned there, fracking won't provide enough gas. It's going to take a decade to get going. It will be damaging for local communities and the gas will still be too expensive. Is it worth it?
Well, that kind of rhetoric is what we saw in that Nick Clegg video doing the rounds a couple of weeks ago, that he was saying that investing in nuclear in 2010 would only maybe yield results in 2020. Well, here we are with a lack of domestic energy supply and in an energy supply crisis. It boggles me that you could argue against attempts to increase supply during this crisis. It's sort of like arguing against trying to grow more food during a famine. Now, I'm sorry, carry on.
No, I was going to say, though, isn't it a case of balancing the risk with the benefits? And if we are, and we are in the energy crisis that we are at the moment, it's not going to yield immediate results, which is what we need now with that pressure on energy prices. And of course, they've been frozen, energy bills, for 2 years, but that's still going to be a cliff edge for a lot of people if the situation hasn't changed. We have no control over when the war in Ukraine is going to end.
Sure. Well, you're right, actually. I disagree with the statement earlier today that fracking would bring new energy supplies online within 6 months. I don't think it's going to be that fast. The truth of that situation is that in the immediate term, there will have to be quite an extensive welfare system put in place to help people deal with their energy bills. The Adam Smith Institute released a paper about that today, where we've made the case for some degree of cash transfer to help people manage their energy bills. Now, that's not what we're talking about right now. To my mind, the point is about trying everything we can to increase supply as soon as we can. And if that's 6 months down the line, if that's 8 months down the line, if it's a year or 2 years down the line, we still have to do it.
OK, Zack, let's come to you next. What do you think?
Well, I think your introduction did all of the work for me. I mean, who wants water and chemicals being pumped into the ground? And actually, the British Geological Society gave a report to the government about tremors, and that's yet to be published. But more importantly, also, maybe even if you put aside the environmental concerns, which as the Green Party deputy leader, I'm very concerned about. But actually, if we're just looking at the cost of living crisis, fracking does not bring down fuel bills. It just causes more damage to local communities, and it deepens our dependence on fossil fuels. We need to be doing much more pragmatic solutions, like investing in renewables and insulating homes. Those solutions are there, and they're ready to do right now, and they don't involve dangerous effects to the planet and to our local communities.
But if people are experiencing, their energy bills, astronomical energy bills, they may have changed their mind about it and have paused, if you like, their concern about the environment and would be willing to consider anything just to get through this particular period of energy shortages.
I think people are more concerned for their health and environment than that. In fact, Survation did a poll really recently that showed that fracking had the least support and was actually the most unpopular of any energy measure. And in fact, solar, offshore wind and onshore wind were actually incredibly popular. So the gap was huge. So I think we've got these easier, popular solutions that are good for the planet versus this awful, unpopular solution that's damaging for the planet. And I think it's pretty easy to know which way we should be going.
John, your response to that?
Well, of course, I'm massively in favour of renewable energy. I don't think it's an either-or situation. I think a lot of what was just mentioned is very good, and we should be investing heavily in that. To some extent, onshore drilling companies could be asked to compensate local communities should they start beginning operations. So in that sense, you could provide some immediate relief to a few new people. But if those operations are successful and you do bolster domestic energy supply, it would make the country less vulnerable to supply-side price squeezes in the future. Now, it's not something I like talking about as a free marketeer, but you could force domestic producers to sell at a fixed price to reduce the risk of rationing and blackouts and so on in future.
Zack?
I think the point here, though, is that actually the cheapest bill is the one you don't have to pay. And what we could be doing a lot more is energy efficiency, which is why I'm talking about insulating homes again and about renewables. If we do that, we won't need as much energy supply. We've got to lessen our dependence on fossil fuels. Does that mean we shouldn't help people now? We absolutely should. And the Green Party would actually go further than what Labour and the Conservatives have said of freezing bills of the energy cap. We go back to last October. What it's at the moment is completely unacceptable. And it's not okay to just say we're going to freeze it. And for those people who are struggling, well, so what? We absolutely need to make sure we're going back to what it was. And we'd also bring in the £20 universal credit uplift back and double it. We'd do all of this by implementing a windfall tax and close those gaps on the government's windfall tax that actually subsidised oil and gas companies, which was completely unacceptable.
All right, John, I mean, unless nationalised, won't this only make private companies that get into fracking, won't it only make them richer in the long run?
First of all, the fact that they could make money is no bad thing. Being able to sell energy within the UK is perfectly fine. We need people to be able to sell energy. Second of all, on the windfall tax issue, it's a bit of a non-starter. The actual taxable income is much less than that 170 billion that's being touted. You could probably, even by Labour's estimations, only raise about 8 billion worth to cover the current expenditure. For context, Liz Truss's plans are in the sort of hundreds of billions range. So it's not really an answer to how you would fund, the necessary welfare transfers that need to take place. I actually agree with the £20 UC uplift coming back in. I think that's a very good idea. But a windfall tax is not the way you would accomplish that. They already pay 65% tax as it is anyway.
Zack, isn't it better? I mean, the transition away from fossil fuels, which ultimately, everybody has the same goal. It's just a matter of when and how long that takes. In the interim, under these extraordinary circumstances, isn't it better to rely on domestic supply rather than importing it?
Well, I'm not sure everyone does have the same goal, so I'm going to reject the premise of your question a little bit. We know that some politicians have vested interests in oil and gas companies, and actually there's a real interest there in making sure that we don't move to renewables, and they want to keep this industry going. But as to your question more widely, absolutely, we need to make sure that we're relying less on importing our energy supply and doing it more locally. And actually, that's when we should be looking into things like community energy. And actually, that again is really popular when people realize that by putting some solar panels on a community building, they could not only help the environment, they can also reduce their own fuel bills. Those ideas are incredibly popular. So I think all of these things are ready for the taking, and the Green Party have been campaigning on them for decades. I'd say that the Conservative Party have pretty much a deep ideology against turbines. They make nonsense about saying they're unsightly. I think when we're in an energy crisis, British people deserve better than that. And right now, we need renewable energy and to insulate our homes.